My name's Mark, and I'll be honest. I never thought I'd be writing something like this. My wife, Emily, and I have been married for 12 years. We've built what I thought was a solid life together. A house in the suburbs, 2 dogs, and enough shared memories to fill a dozen photo albums. I was the kind of guy who believed in us, in loyalty, and in the strength of our partnership. But over the past few months, something shifted. Emily started acting different. She'd always been outgoing and sharp, but now her wit felt like a blade aimed at me. Conversations turned into arguments, and arguments turned into long stretches of cold silence. Started small. She began spending more time on her phone, her laughter more private, her smiles fewer and far between. Then there were the unexplained absences. Yoga with Lisa, she'd say. Even though Lisa had mentioned during a barbecue that she wasn't into yoga, I didn't question her at first. Hell, I wanted to trust her. We all need hobbies, right? But when her late-night yoga sessions turned into overnight stays at Lisa's place after wine-fueled movie nights, I felt the first twinge of suspicion. I remember standing at the kitchen counter one night, staring at her phone buzzing on the counter. It was locked, of course. Emily never used to lock her phone. My gut told me to pick it up, to start digging, but I didn't. I hated the idea of snooping. Felt like admitting defeat. That's when I noticed something new. A scent. A cologne. Faint but undeniable. Clinging to her coat when she came home one night. I didn't wear cologne, and I didn't recognize the smell. I asked her about it casually, pretending not to care. She looked me straight in the eye and laughed. "Oh, Mark, you're not getting jealous, are you?" Her tone was playful, but her eyes, they didn't match. I let it go, or at least I pretended to. But that night, lying in bed next to her, I stared at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. This was the beginning, the first crack in the foundation of our marriage. I didn't know it yet, but the storm was coming, and it was going to tear everything apart. The next big clue came 2 weeks later. Emily and I had planned a date night, something we hadn't done in months. She was distant when she got home from work, brushing off my attempts to chat about the day. Still, she dressed up, slipping into a black dress I hadn't seen in a while. She looked stunning, but something felt off. Dinner at our favorite Italian place was a bust. Emily was glued to her phone, texting furiously under the table. I made a joke about her secret admirer, hoping to lighten the mood. Instead, she snapped, "Mark, you're always so insecure. Can't I just have friends? Friends, right?" The rest of the night was tense. She barely ate, barely talked, and rushed us out of there before dessert. A first for her. Back home, she claimed she had a migraine and retreated to the bedroom while I cleaned up. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was her evasiveness at dinner. Maybe it was the nagging voice in my head that had been growing louder. Either way, as I passed by her purse on the counter, I noticed her phone sticking out. It wasn't locked this time. I hesitated for a moment, heart pounding in my chest. Then I swiped the screen. A series of texts from a contact named Oliver popped up. "Oliver, I can't stop thinking about earlier. You're incredible. Emily, shoo, don't say that. He'll hear. Oliver, let me know when we can meet again. I miss you already. Emily, tomorrow same time. EXO." My hands shook as I read the messages. My mouth went dry, and I felt like the walls were closing in around me. Tomorrow, same time. Who the hell was Oliver? I didn't confront her that night. Couldn't. Instead, I stayed up late, pacing the living room, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. My mind raced with questions, each one uglier than the last. By the time the sun came up, I knew one thing. I needed proof. The morning after I read those texts, I felt like I was sleepwalking through my day. Emily acted normal, maybe even a little chirpier than usual. She kissed me goodbye before leaving for work and asked if I could pick up groceries later. The audacity made my stomach churn. I didn't say a word about what I'd seen. Instead, I played along, acting like the clueless husband she clearly thought I was. But inside, a plan was forming. That afternoon, I bought a small, discreet GPS tracker online. It was cheap and would attach easily to her car. I hated the idea of stooping to this level, but I needed to know where she was going during these yoga nights. The device arrived 2 days later. Emily was out at a happy hour with coworkers, so I took the opportunity to attach it to her car. My hands were shaking as I crouched in the garage, securing it near the wheel well. This wasn't who I was. I didn't spy, I didn't snoop. But here I was, sinking to her level because I couldn't stand the not knowing. The following day, she mentioned another yoga night. My heart pounded, but I played it cool. "Have fun," I said, forcing a smile. As soon as she left, I pulled up the GPS app on my phone. The blinking dot that represented her car didn't go to Lisa's neighborhood. Instead, it headed downtown, stopping at an upscale hotel I'd never even heard her mention. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart racing. I told myself maybe it was innocent. Maybe she was meeting a friend, grabbing drinks, or attending some event. But deep down, I knew. I waited an hour, then 2, before I finally drove to the hotel. Parking a block away, I sat in my car, unsure of what I'd do next. Would I confront her? Would I even find her? Before I could answer those questions, the lobby doors slid open. And there she was, walking arm in arm with a man I didn't recognize. They were laughing, her hand casually resting on his chest. I clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I couldn't look away as they strolled to his car and drove off into the night. Now I had a face to match the name. Oliver. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was real. My wife was cheating, and I had proof. That night, Emily came home late. I was sitting in the living room, the TV on but muted, my thoughts spinning in endless circles. She walked in, her hair slightly tousled, the faint smell of his cologne still clinging to her. "Hey," she said casually, dropping her purse on the counter. "You're up late." "Yeah," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Just couldn't sleep." She nodded, oblivious, and poured herself a glass of water. Watching her act so normal, like she hadn't just spent the evening with another man, made my blood boil. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, to let her know I wasn't a fool. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I said, "How was yoga?" She froze for a split second, the glass halfway to her lips. But then she recovered, smiling faintly. "Good. We did a new flow."
I'm exhausted.
"Liar. Glad you're enjoying it," I said, forcing a smile. She mumbled something about needing a shower and disappeared into the bathroom. I sat there, gripping the armrest of the couch, replaying the image of her with Oliver. Confronting her now would be satisfying, sure, but it wouldn't be enough. I needed more than a scene in the living room. I needed to know how long this had been going on, how deep it went. I needed to make sure she couldn't weasel her way out of it with excuses or gaslighting. I started digging. The next day, while Emily was at work, I went through our shared laptop. She wasn't careful, her browser history told me everything. Reservations at the same hotel under her email. An account on a messaging app I'd never heard of. And then, jackpot. A folder buried deep in her documents, labeled innocuously as work notes. Inside were screenshots of texts with Oliver. "Oliver. Next week. Let's skip dinner and head straight to my place. Emily. You're insatiable. But I'm not complaining." Winky face. Oliver. "Does he suspect anything?" Emily. "Mark? No. He's clueless." That last message hit me like a punch to the gut. Clueless. That's what she thought of me. I copied everything to a flash drive, my hands trembling with a mix of rage and heartbreak. As I packed it away, one thought kept echoing in my mind. This wasn't just infidelity. It was betrayal on a level I couldn't forgive. She didn't just cheat on me. She mocked me while she did it. And for that, I would make her pay. Over the next few days, I kept up the charade. I kissed her goodbye in the mornings, cooked dinner, and even offered to rub her shoulders after her exhausting yoga sessions. It took every ounce of restraint not to let my anger boil over. But I had a plan now. First, I hired a private investigator. I wanted a professional to gather the kind of airtight evidence that would hold up in court. Photos, videos, timestamps, the whole package. If Emily wanted to play dirty, I'd show her just how far I could go. The PI worked fast. Within days, he had photos of Emily and Oliver kissing in parking lots, sneaking into hotel rooms, and holding hands like lovesick teenagers. There were even recordings of their conversations in public spaces, where Emily referred to me as her boring, predictable husband. Each new piece of evidence was like a dagger to the heart, but it also fueled my determination. This wasn't just about exposing her. This was about ensuring she'd regret every choice she'd made to betray me. Next, I started quietly preparing. I visited a lawyer, who reviewed the evidence and assured me we could file for divorce with Emily taking the brunt of the financial fallout. With this kind of evidence, she said, tapping the stack of photos and documents, she'll have no leg to stand on. You'll keep the house, the assets, and probably even alimony. But that wasn't enough for me. I didn't just want to win. I wanted Emily to feel the same humiliation and betrayal she had inflicted on me. That's when I came up with an idea. Emily loved hosting parties. She thrived on the attention and adoration of our friends and neighbors. So, I decided to give her an audience for what was coming next. I started planning a surprise party for her upcoming birthday, inviting everyone we knew, friends, co-workers, even her parents. I played the loving husband one last time. And then, in front of everyone, I'd reveal the truth. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. The weeks leading up to Emily's birthday were a masterclass in self-control. I acted like the perfect husband, going above and beyond to make her feel appreciated. I left sweet notes in her bag, planned casual date nights, and even asked her opinion on the party I was throwing to celebrate her. She lapped it up. Every compliment, every act of kindness. It made her smug. She probably thought she had me wrapped around her finger, the clueless husband oblivious to her double life. I watched her closely during those days, taking mental notes of her behavior. She was carefree, almost glowing. I imagined her laughing with Oliver about how easy it was to keep me in the dark. It took everything in me not to scream at her. But I had to stay the course. The party planning was easy enough. Emily loved a good show, so I made sure it would be a night to remember. I booked a caterer, decorated the house, and even hired a photographer to capture memories. I invited all her closest friends, including a few mutual ones who had always been quick to gossip. On the surface, it looked like a loving husband pulling out all the stops for his wife. But beneath it, I was a man sharpening the knife. The private investigator gave me one final update a few days before the party. Oliver had booked a weekend getaway for him and Emily at a luxury resort. They're leaving the morning after the party, the PI said. She doesn't suspect a thing. Perfect. I added the finishing touches to my plan. I compiled all the evidence into a slideshow, photos, text messages, and even audio clips. I'd made sure to time it perfectly with the climax of the party. Emily wouldn't just be exposed. She'd be laid bare in front of everyone who mattered to her. The night before the party, she came home late again. I pretended to be asleep, but I heard her humming softly as she changed out of her clothes. "You're amazing, Mark," she whispered, leaning down to kiss my forehead before slipping into bed. Amazing. She had no idea just how amazing I was about to be. Emily's birthday arrived, and the house was buzzing with energy. Friends and family poured in, filling the living room with laughter and chatter. Emily glowed with delight, flitting from group to group, basking in the compliments about how beautiful she looked and how lucky she was to have such a devoted husband. I played my part perfectly. I greeted guests warmly, made sure the drinks flowed, and stayed at Emily's side whenever she called me over to meet someone. She introduced me with pride, as though I were the perfect partner. Mark insisted on everything being just right, she gushed to a coworker. I'm so spoiled. I smiled, biting back the bile rising in my throat. Around 8 p.m., I signaled to the DJ to lower the music. I tapped a glass with a spoon to get everyone's attention. Can I have a moment, everyone? I said, grinning like the happiest man in the room. First, thank you all for coming to celebrate Emily tonight. She deserves the world, and I'm lucky to share mine with her. The crowd erupted in applause, and Emily beamed, her cheeks flushing as she blew me a kiss. "I've put together something special," I continued. "A slideshow of memories to remind us all of how amazing she truly is." The lights dimmed, and the screen lit up. At first, it was harmless. Photos of us from vacations, holidays, and dinners with friends. The room was filled with murmurs of admiration and awe. Then, the tone shifted. The first photo of Emily and Oliver appeared. It was subtle. Them standing too close in a parking lot, her hand lingering on his arm. The room grew quieter. Another photo followed, her kissing Oliver in broad daylight outside a coffee shop. A gasp rippled through the crowd. "Mark, what is this?" Emily's voice cut through the air, sharp and panicked. "Just a few more memories, sweetheart," I said, keeping my tone calm. The slideshow moved on to screenshots of their texts. The crowd was now deadly silent, except for the occasional shocked murmur. Then came the audio clips, Oliver's voice and hers, laughing about how gullible I was, planning their secret rendezvous. Emily stood frozen, her face pale and eyes wide. "Mark, stop it!" she screamed, lunging toward me. But I stepped back, holding up a hand.
"No, Emily.
"You've done enough talking behind my back. It's my turn now." I turned to the crowd. "This is what my wife has been up to while I planned this party, while I worked to make her happy. Meet Oliver, everyone. The man she's been screwing for months." Emily burst into tears, her perfect image crumbling in front of everyone she cared about. Her friends exchanged horrified glances. Her parents sat stiffly, her mother clutching her pearls. The room erupted into chaos. Gasps, whispers, even a few people storming out. I grabbed the microphone one last time. "Emily, this was your life. And now it's over." I walked out the door, leaving her to face the ruins of her carefully constructed world. I drove aimlessly for hours after leaving the party, my mind racing but my chest oddly calm. It was done. The truth was out, and Emily's web of lies had finally unraveled. My phone buzzed nonstop with calls and messages. I ignored them all, knowing they were either Emily's desperate attempts to salvage what was left of her dignity or nosy friends looking for the full story. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone. When I finally returned home in the early hours of the morning, the house was empty. Emily was gone. Her parents must have taken her back to their place, judging by the abandoned high heels near the front door. I stepped into the living room and surveyed the wreckage. Half-empty glasses, discarded plates, and torn decorations littered the space. The projector screen was still up, frozen on the last text exchange between her and Oliver. I sat down on the couch, staring at it. The final message glared back at me. "Emily, he has no clue. I'll tell him I'm staying at Lisa's. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. EXO." The anger bubbled up again, but this time it felt hollow. I'd already hit my breaking point. There was nothing left but the quiet, gnawing ache of betrayal. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the messages. There were a few from mutual friends. "Lisa, Mark, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. Greg. Dude, that was brutal. Let me know if you need anything." Then there was Emily's flood of texts. "Emily, Mark, please let's talk."
Emily, I'm sorry, okay?
"I didn't mean for it to get this far." "Emily, you're being so cruel. Why would you humiliate me like that?" "Emily, we need to fix this. Please call me." "Fix this?" The audacity of her words made me laugh bitterly. I finally responded with a single line. There's nothing left to fix. Talk to my lawyer." I hit send and immediately blocked her number. The next day, I packed up all her things. Every piece of clothing, every sentimental trinket, every reminder of her. I piled it into boxes and left them on the front porch. Attached was a note. "Emily, your things are here. Pick them up by the end of the week. Anything left will be donated. Mark." I knew she wouldn't dare show up, not after what had happened, but I wanted it in writing, a final act of closure. What I didn't expect was the storm brewing just around the corner. Because Oliver, he wasn't just a random guy, and Emily's betrayal was about to get a lot darker than I ever imagined. 2 days later, I got a call from my lawyer. "Mark, we need to meet," she said, her voice clipped. "There's a complication." I was exhausted, emotionally drained from the fallout of the party. But I agreed. When I arrived at her office, she handed me a thick folder. "I did some digging on Oliver," she began. "It turns out he isn't just some random guy. He's got a history." I opened the folder and stared at the documents. Arrest records, financial statements, and a series of headlines jumped out at me. Real estate mogul investigated for fraud and embezzlement. Local businessman linked to criminal syndicate. Oliver Bennett named person of interest in money laundering case. My head spun as I pieced it together. "You're telling me Emily's affair wasn't just an affair?" She nodded grimly. "It's worse. Oliver isn't just a businessman. He has ties to organized crime. And given your recent public display, you might be on his radar now." I sat back in my chair, the weight of her words settling over me. All this time, I'd thought Emily's betrayal was just about lust and lies. But now it seemed like I was entangled in something much bigger. "Is my safety at risk?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's hard to say," she admitted. "But it's possible. Men like Oliver don't take kindly to humiliation. And you just publicly exposed him and your wife." My blood ran cold. "Here's what I recommend," she continued. "We file the divorce immediately, sever all financial ties, and document everything. And Mark," she hesitated before finishing, "you might want to consider security measures, just in case." I left her office in a daze, my mind racing. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. This was about my own survival. That night, I installed cameras around my house and changed all the locks. I started carrying a knife in my pocket, a feeble defense, but it gave me some sense of control. The next morning, I got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated but answered. "Mark Sterling?" a deep voice asked. "Yes. Who's this?" "This is a courtesy call," the voice said, calm but menacing. "Stay out of Oliver's business. You've done enough damage." The line went dead. I stood there, clutching the phone, a chill running down my spine. Emily's betrayal had opened a door to something far more dangerous than I'd ever anticipated. And now, it seemed like I was in the crosshairs of a man who didn't play by the rules. The phone call rattled me, but I tried to convince myself it was just a scare tactic. After all, Oliver and his people couldn't be bothered with some suburban guy, right? Wrong. 2 days later, I found my car vandalized. The tires were slashed, and a single word was spray-painted across the hood in bold. Red letters, "Payback." I stood in my driveway, my stomach churning. This wasn't just a warning, it was a message. I filed a police report, but the officer barely seemed interested. "Probably some kids," he said dismissively. "You should consider installing a better security system." The pit in my stomach deepened. They weren't taking it seriously, and now I was on my own. That night I called Emily. I didn't want to, but I needed answers. She answered on the third ring. "Mark." Her voice was hesitant. "Emily, we need to talk," I said, keeping my tone cold. "What the hell have you gotten me into?" "What are you talking about?" she asked, feigning innocence. "Oliver, the man you've been screwing," I snapped. "Did you know he's tied to the mob? Did you know his people are threatening me now?" She fell silent. "You knew," I said, my voice rising. "You knew, and you didn't care." "It's not like that," she finally blurted. "Oliver isn't dangerous. He's misunderstood. You're blowing this out of proportion." "Misunderstood?" I barked out a bitter laugh. "He had my car vandalized, Emily. What's next? My house. My life." "I didn't think it would come to this," she whispered. "I didn't think they'd involve you." "You didn't think at all," I spat. "You just played your little games and dragged me into your mess." "Well, congratulations, Emily. You've ruined everything." I hung up before she could respond. That night I barely slept. Every creak, every shadow, every distant sound felt like a threat. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. I thought exposing Emily was the end of the story. I was wrong. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. I decided to take matters into my own hands. If Oliver thought he could intimidate me, he was about to learn he'd picked the wrong guy to mess with. The next day, I made 2 calls. The first was to my lawyer, instructing her to fast-track the divorce and secure a restraining order against Oliver. The second was to a man I never thought I'd speak to again, an old high school friend who had taken a much darker path in life. His name was Vince, and if anyone could help me figure out how to deal with a man like Oliver, it was him. "Mark," Vince said when he picked up, his voice rough. "Haven't heard from you in years. What's going on?" "I need your help," I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. "It's serious, and it's dangerous." "Say no more," he replied.
I'm listening.
And just like that, the game changed. Vince and I hadn't spoken in years, but I knew his reputation. He wasn't the kind of guy who played by the rules. But in this situation, that's exactly what I needed. If anyone could help me stand up to Oliver and his people, it was him. We met the next evening at a dive bar on the outskirts of town. Vince looked exactly how I remembered. Rugged, tattooed, and carrying an air of quiet danger. "Mark," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Long time. So, what kind of mess are you in?" I explained everything, the affair, the party, and the fallout with Oliver. Vince listened silently, sipping his whiskey, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back, letting out a low whistle. "You've really stepped in it, haven't you? Can you help me or not?" I asked, my frustration bubbling to the surface. He smirked. "Relax. I've dealt with guys like Oliver before. They're all bark until someone bites back. You just need to show him you're not afraid." "That's easy for you to say," I muttered. "He's already vandalized my car. What's next, my house? My life."
Vince shrugged.
"That's why I'm here. First things first, we need to send a message. Let him know you're not an easy target." "What kind of message?" I asked warily. Vince leaned in, his voice dropping. "We find out where he operates, his business, his hangouts, and we make some noise. Nothing illegal, just enough to rattle him." I hesitated, the moral lines blurring in my mind. But Vince was right. Sitting back and waiting for Oliver to strike again wasn't an option. "Fine," I said finally. "What do we do?" Vince grinned, pulling out a notebook and pen. "First, we'll need some information. Addresses, schedules, anything you can dig up." "I don't have much," I admitted. "Leave that to me," he said, scribbling something down. "I've got a few contacts who can help." For the next hour, we hashed out a plan. Vince would gather intel on Oliver, while I focused on documenting every interaction and threat for my lawyer. As we wrapped up, Vince clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry, Mark. Guys like Oliver are cowards. They crumble the moment someone stands up to them." I wasn't so sure, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. That hope was short-lived. The next morning, I woke to a text from an unknown number. "Unknown. You should have stayed quiet. Now things are about to get ugly." Attached was a photo of my house, taken just hours earlier. The blinds were drawn, but the image was clear enough to show someone had been standing outside, watching. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. Oliver was escalating, and I knew I didn't have much time to act. I sent the photo to Vince immediately. His response came seconds later. "Vince, I'm on it. Meet me tonight. We're going to make our move." Things were about to get messy. That night, I met Vince in a desolate industrial park on the outskirts of town. He was leaning against his truck, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his eyes scanning the shadows. "You ready for this?" he asked as I approached. "Do I have a choice?" I muttered, my nerves frayed. He smirked. "Not really." Vince had done his homework. He'd tracked down one of Oliver's key operations, a warehouse that doubled as a front for his business dealings. It was the kind of place where shady transactions happened under the guise of legitimate work. The plan was simple. Disrupt his operation enough to send a message. Nothing too drastic. Just enough to make him think twice before coming after me again. "Here's the deal," Vince said, popping the trunk of his car. Inside were cans of spray paint, bolt cutters, and a bag of what looked like industrial-grade stink bombs. "We're going to make it clear he's not untouchable," Vince explained. "We're not breaking anything, but we're going to leave him a little reminder that he's vulnerable." I hesitated as Vince handed me a can of spray paint. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" "Trust me," he said, his tone firm. "Guys like Oliver only respect power. You can't sit back and hope he goes away. You have to hit back." Reluctantly, I followed him to the warehouse. We stuck to the shadows, avoiding the security cameras Vince had scoped out earlier. It was quiet, eerily so. Vince pried open a side gate with the bolt cutters and we slipped inside. We worked quickly, spraying messages on the walls in bold red letters. "We're watching. Stay out of our business. Think twice." Vince tossed the stink bombs into the ventilation system, ensuring the entire place would reek for days. By the time we were done, the warehouse looked like a scene from a bad mob movie. As we slipped back out, my heart pounded in my chest. I half expected Oliver's goons to appear out of nowhere, guns blazing. But the night remained silent. Back at the truck, Vince lit another cigarette, grinning. "See? That wasn't so bad. Do you think it'll work?" I asked, my voice shaky. "It'll send a message," he said confidently. "Now we wait and see how he reacts." I nodded, but my gut told me this wasn't over. The fallout. The next morning, I woke to another text from an unknown number. "Unknown. You think this is a game? You just made it personal." Attached was a photo of Vince's truck, its tires slashed and windows shattered. I called him immediately. "Vince, they know?" "Yeah, I figured they might," he said, sounding almost amused. "Don't worry about me. I've dealt with worse." But I was worried. Oliver wasn't backing down, and now I dragged Vince into my mess. That evening, Vince called with an update. "Looks like our little stunt rattled them. My guy says Oliver's ramping up security at all his spots. He's on edge." "Good," I said, though I didn't feel victorious. "Bad news, though," Vince added. "They're looking for you, Mark. Oliver's not the type to let something like this slide. You need to watch your back." The threat wasn't just looming anymore, it was closing in. And for the first time, I wondered if I'd made a mistake fighting back. The following days were a blur of paranoia and tension. I barely left the house, jumping at every sound, every passing car. Vince kept checking in, assuring me he had eyes on the situation. But his calm demeanor did little to ease my growing dread. Then the breaking point came. It was late one evening when I heard a loud crash outside. I rushed to the window and saw my front yard lit up with flames. My car was on fire. Thick black smoke billowed into the night sky as the fire roared, consuming the vehicle in seconds. I called 911, my voice shaking as I reported the arson. The fire department arrived quickly, but the damage was done. My car was a melted husk, and my neighbors stood on their lawns, staring in shock. As the firefighters worked, I caught sight of something glinting in the charred wreckage. Once the flames were out, I walked over, my stomach twisting. It was a single silver lighter, engraved with the initials OB.
Oliveres signature.
The message was clear. This was no idle threat. He was coming for me. I called Vince as soon as the fire trucks pulled away. "This has gone too far," I said, pacing in my destroyed front yard. "He's not just playing games anymore. What do we do?" Vince's voice was steady, almost unnervingly so. "We escalate." "Escalate how?" I snapped. "We hit him where it hurts," Vince said. "His reputation, his operations. We expose him." I hesitated. "You mean, go public?" "Exactly," Vince said. "Guys like Oliver thrive on fear and secrecy. If we shine a light on his dirty dealings, he loses his leverage." I didn't like it. Going public would put an even bigger target on my back. But Vince was right. If I didn't fight back, Oliver wouldn't stop until I was completely destroyed. Vince set the wheels in motion. Using his contacts, he compiled a dossier of Oliver's criminal activities. Money laundering, fraud, illegal deals. He included photos, documents, and recordings. evidence that couldn't be ignored. Meanwhile, I gathered every piece of evidence I had against Oliver. The texts, the photos, the threats. I even pulled the lighter from my burned car, its surface still bearing his initials. Vince reached out to a journalist he trusted, someone known for exposing corruption. "This is your chance to bring down a major player," he told her. The journalist agreed to publish the story, but she warned us, "Once this goes live, you'll have a spotlight on you. You need to be prepared." I wasn't sure if I was prepared, but at this point I had no other choice. The article went live 3 days later. Local businessman linked to organized crime. Evidence suggests ties to violent intimidation tactics. The piece was explosive, detailing Oliver's empire and the methods he used to maintain power. Vince and I remained anonymous sources, but the lighter, the vandalism, and the threats were all mentioned. The fallout was immediate. Oliver's name was dragged through the mud, and his business partners started pulling away. But I knew this wasn't over. If anything, Oliver would see this as a declaration of war. And now, the only question was, how far would he go? The article had the effect Vince promised. It shook Oliver's empire. Within days, his name became synonymous with scandal, and whispers of investigations from federal agencies began circulating. But the move didn't come without consequences. 2 nights after the story broke, I came home to find my front door ajar. Every instinct screamed at me to call the cops, but something deeper, some primal part of me, urged caution. I grabbed the knife I now kept in my car and stepped inside. The house was a wreck. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled out, and photos smashed on the floor. They hadn't taken anything of value. This wasn't a robbery. It was a message. On the wall, scrawled in spray paint, were the words, "You're dead." I staggered back, my chest tightening. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was a direct threat. I called Vince, my voice shaking as I explained what had happened. "This was bound to happen," he said, his tone dark. "But this also means he's getting desperate. He's losing control." "Losing control? Vince, he's threatening to kill me." I snapped. "Then it's time to finish this," Vince replied. Vince's plan was bold, dangerous even, but it was our best shot. Using his contacts, Vince fed false information to Oliver's people, hinting that I was planning to skip town with key evidence against him. The bait was simple. I'd be leaving late that night, driving alone to an undisclosed location. The goal was to lure Oliver or his men into making a move, giving us a chance to catch them red-handed. Vince had arranged for a few trusted associates to shadow me, armed with cameras and ready to call the authorities at the first sign of trouble. I hated the idea of being the bait, but I hated the idea of living in fear even more. As night fell, I got into my car, my hands trembling on the wheel. I drove slowly, sticking to back roads, my heart pounding with every turn. The first car appeared in my rearview mirror about 15 minutes in. It followed at a distance, its headlights dimmed to avoid suspicion. Then a second car joined. "They're biting." Vince's voice crackled over the burner phone he'd given me. "Just keep driving. We've got eyes on them." I clenched the wheel tighter, sweat dripping down my temple. The cars closed in, their headlights now glaring as they boxed me in on a deserted stretch of road. A dark SUV pulled ahead, forcing me to stop. The doors flew open, and 3 men stepped out, their faces shadowed but their intent clear. One of them stepped forward, pulling out a crowbar. "Out of the car, Sterling," he growled. This was it. Before I could respond, Vince's team burst out of the shadows. A blinding flash of light illuminated the scene as they started taking photos and recording. "Smile for the camera, boys," Vince's voice boomed. The men froze, panic flashing across their faces. One of them cursed and bolted for the SUV, but Vince's team blocked their path. "Cops are already on their way," Vince said, stepping forward. "You want to add resisting arrest to your list of problems?" The leader hesitated, his grip on the crowbar tightening. For a moment I thought he might swing it anyway. But then the distant wail of sirens pierced the night. "Let's go," he barked at the others, retreating to their cars. They sped off into the darkness, leaving me shaking in the middle of the road. Vince clapped a hand on my shoulder. That should send a message loud and clear. You're not an easy target. But I wasn't celebrating yet. This wasn't over. Not until Oliver himself was dealt with. The night after the ambush, Vince and I regrouped at his place, going over the footage and photos his team had captured. The evidence was damning. Proof of Oliver's men stalking me and attempting to intimidate with violence. This is the final nail in his coffin, Vince said, scrolling through the clearest shots of their faces. The authorities will eat this up. Sure enough, the next day, Vince's journalist contact published a follow-up article featuring the new evidence. It named Oliver's associates, detailed their criminal tactics, and highlighted the lengths they were going to silence me. But the real blow came when law enforcement finally took notice. Oliver's name was already hot in federal circles thanks to the first article, and the new evidence pushed them into action. Within 48 hours, agents raided Oliver's properties, arresting several of his men and seizing documents that linked him to a network of crimes. Amid the chaos, Emily resurfaced. She called from an unknown number, her voice trembling. "Mark, I didn't know it would get this bad," she said. "Oliver, he's dangerous. You need to stop this before someone gets hurt." "Someone already did, Emily," I snapped. "Me." She started crying, but I felt nothing. No pity, no sadness, just cold detachment. "You made your choice," I said. "Now live with it. Don't call me again." I hung up and blocked the number. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the journalist. "You won't believe this," she said. "Oliver's been arrested." It turned out the raids had uncovered evidence of tax fraud, money laundering, and violent intimidation tactics. The charges were enough to put him away for decades. Hearing the news brought a wave of relief, but it was bittersweet. While Oliver's reign of terror was over, the damage he and Emily had done to my life couldn't be undone. With the danger gone, I focused on rebuilding. The divorce was finalized quickly. Emily didn't contest after her parents begged her to keep things quiet. I kept the house, the savings, and most importantly, my peace of mind. Vince and I remained close after everything. His unorthodox methods may have made me uncomfortable at times, but he'd saved my life. As for Emily, the last I heard, she moved out of town. She tried to reconcile with Oliver after his arrest, but he cut her off, leaving her to deal with the fallout alone. Looking back, I realized this wasn't just a story of betrayal, it was a story of survival. Emily's affair wasn't just about infidelity. It was a gateway into a dangerous world I never asked to be part of. But I fought back. I refused to be a victim. If I've learned anything, it's this: trust your instincts. And when someone shows you who they truly are, believe them the first time. To anyone going through something similar, don't let betrayal define you. Rise above it, and never be afraid to fight for yourself. This is my story, and while it's not the one I expected, it's one I'm proud to have survived.